Welcome to today's video. Today I will be introducing you to George Holmes Howison. He's a philosopher of great renown, but he's fallen into obscurity in the past 100 years. This is the book that I'll be introducing you to. It's called The Limits of Evolution and Other Essays Illustrating the Metaphysical Theory of Personal Idealism by George Holmes Howison. And he lived from, I believe, 1882, or let's see, no, earlier than that. I think the essays were, okay, so he was born in 1834 and he died in 1916. He was a professor of philosophy at the University of California at the San Francisco location, or Berkeley. Berkeley is more widely known. He gave a simpler take on the metaphysical philosophy of idealism. And Howison's version is to be distinguished from Berkeley's version in that he called it personal idealism. So he took idealism a step farther than Berkeley did, and he reasoned that it's a rational fact that we cannot validate any other theory of reality than one that is based on human consciousness. So idealism essentially denies the existence of a self-existing or independent physical reality, independent from the human mind, that is, and that reality is essentially a product of human consciousness. And in calling his version personal idealism, he also reasoned that our experience of reality validates the idea that at the center of the universe is actually personality and intention, and essentially human intelligence. And he goes to great lengths to show that all of that might be deduced from our experiences. So in this book, he has like 5 different essays of preface in which he gives a brief introduction to the concept of personal idealism, and then he breaks it down into other categories and writes about various things. He writes about, the title essay is The Limit of Evolution. Evolution, the philosophy of Darwin, where he observed the transmutation of species and determined that this was driven by the survival of the fittest, meaning that small genetic mutations would occur, allowing certain individuals to compete more successfully in a changing world, and then they would also be more successful with reproductive activities, and so their offspring would come to predominate over offsprings of those who did not evolve or transmutate, and so species would gradually change over time as a product of natural selection. So Howison addresses how evolution, the concept of evolution, has limits, and it doesn't necessarily apply to the entirety of human experience. Okay, so then he has an essay called Modern Science and Pantheism, in which he compares empirical science, physicalism, physical only science. He relates it to the concept of pantheism, which is the idea that the divine is present in all phenomena in the universe. Okay. Then he talks about art and poetry, he talks about German philosophy, and then he has an essay titled Human Immortality, Its Positive Argument. So he presents a rational analysis of our experience and shows that it, if properly understood, gives evidence that we are essentially immortal. And not only if you're thinking, well, there's life beyond the grave, that kind of immortality, but he deduces that the same immortality can be projected into the past to show that individual humans actually have their basis prior to time, and that time is a phenomena that we in fact create as individuals. So it's a highly intriguing essay. And then the final essay of the book is The Harmony of Determinism and Freedom. Okay, so determinism is taken to mean, if God created the universe and is omniscient, meaning he knows all things, how is it that we as individuals have any sort of freedom, and that we're not some sort of robot or puppet? Because if he knows everything, past and future, and all of our potential choices, how is it that he, being the cause of reality, doesn't in fact determine reality to a degree that negates the idea of human freedom? Okay, and he shows that determinism, meaning that there is divine causation by a supreme being, in fact may be viewed as harmonious with our freedom. And he doesn't mean just any sort of freedom that is mere lip service, but he takes the concept of human freedom to the absolute level, meaning that we essentially create ourselves. So how is it that we can be created by God and yet be created by ourselves, and continuously create ourselves within an order that was essentially put in place by the divine? Okay, so that is an extremely complicated essay, and so is the other one on human immortality. Okay, so I've made a few notes. So I highly recommend that you acquire this book for yourself. You can get ordered off the internet. Rare Book Search. It's not impossible to get this. This copy was printed, fairly recently. And most of these books of this type can be had, like in the print on demand thing. So, I really recommend that you get this book for yourself. This one was published by Hard Pressed Publishing, and their website is hardpress.net. So, these essays are deep and complicated and subtle. And so, because it's very subtle, it requires a very patient and steady meditative approach. And by meditative, I mean that it'll probably require you to ponder a certain phrase or sentence until it's fully grasped. Howison, didn't write much, and it was said that he didn't write much because he was so much of a perfectionist that he, in addressing these topics, found it so challenging to make his point clear and unmistakable that he would work on the essays for many years before he'd feel that they were into sufficient shape for publishing. So he doesn't really waste many words. but it's deep, and you can't just think that you're just going to pick it up and whip through it, and it's going to all be crystal clear on the first take, because particularly the one on human immortality, I read it 3 or 4 times and sort of thought about it repeatedly, and also I'm in the habit of reading metaphysics and philosophy, and so I would take a phrase and think about it in the context of other philosophers, particularly Emanuel Swedenborg, and I found gradual clarity in it. So the development of true rationality is the process of applying ratios. So I would form a ratio between different semantics or different ways to express similar ideas, and you got to hold a concept or a phrase in your mental hands for a while and turn it over and think about it. But when you reach a point where you sort of get it, it's so liberating, because I really feel like in reading this book and studying it, I attained a much deeper, far deeper understanding of myself and the nature of reality, and it really brought me sort of a gigantic sense of relief. To be in possession of clarity is a wonderful thing. It really is, and it's worth the effort. Okay, but it's a slow and deliberate digestive activity. Okay, so now the book or the essay on determinism and freedom. The main issue is basically divine causation. Okay, so that it says that we're going to try to understand how the universe is caused by the divine, okay, by the supreme being. Okay, now God in modern times has undergone an evolution, the concept of God. Okay, so for many centuries, I think humanity was willing to entertain the notion of something of like a Santa Claus type figure as God, where he's sitting up on high on a cloud looking down and periodically granting reality to move in a certain way according to his plan, and that he was sort of manipulating us for our own good, or like you would pray and ask for his favorable dispensation towards you, and that idea is fairly childish. It really is. We know that there's order in the universe, and we sense that if our decisions are to be meaningful and real, then it has to be within order and not just at the whim of this all-powerful being. If that's all it is that we're just gaining the good graces of a divine being that might be persuaded one way or the other, it doesn't make an intuitive sense, because we need the concept of justice and order to function. For our minds to function properly, we need to feel that we're working within a framework that is knowable and predictable and works according to law, and our sense of what is good and true is really based on an underlying idea of order. That we can figure out what's good if we can establish the boundaries of whatever it is, like the framework in which it finds itself. Does it fit? Does it harmonize? Is it, right in the context? And so the context is important. So, if you're still sort of just in the process of separating from that Santa Claus idea of God, it's okay to call yourself an agnostic, and to be challenged to then replace it with a more complete idea of God. And that's what these essays are all about, and that's what they'll do for you if you'll take the time to read them. Okay, so divine causation means that a supreme being makes things happen. He determines the condition of reality, okay? But now freedom is the space where we can exist within that reality without being robots or puppets, okay? So let's look at animals in comparison to human beings, okay? So now a shark, as a apex predator, is out roaming a vast sea, and he's free to follow his instincts without a whole lot of hindrance. He can swim around wherever he wishes. There's essentially no fences. He can come and go wherever he feels he wants to, and he can bite whatever he wants to. But now let's say that somehow that shark might be endowed with a contemplative imagination, one that like human being has, and exposure to knowledge of an alternative existence. So now his physiology would limit him in his ability to realize any other existence than the one that he's conducting at the moment. But the fact of the matter is that a shark does not have a contemplative imagination, and nor does any animal. But this is like the mark of humanity, is that we do have an additional level of consciousness that allows us to imaginatively contemplate alternatives and meaning. And we then have an ability, although it's largely limited, to act upon those imaginations and those contemplations and strive to change our reality. So we have, obviously, in comparison to animals, a much greater level of freedom. But, did any of us, like, at our birth, choose our parents, or choose our society into which we were born, or choose our place in time? And often I feel like an anachronism, meaning that I might have been happier in a different age, and I sort of lament not being born, at a time when reality was different, and might have I chosen otherwise? And because I was not allowed to choose the conditions of my birth, it seems that my freedom is limited. And so because I wasn't in control of the context in which my consciousness first apparently came into being, that limitation seems to negate everything going forward. Because if I couldn't have chosen at the start, like my cards, then how can I be said to be free? I was given a certain set of cards and said, play. And that's not fair. That's not free. Okay? Real freedom would be to choose one's own cards and choose the playing field. So, we obviously have more freedom than a shark, but do we have real freedom? Okay? So, what Howison proceeds to argue is that we do in fact have that sort of real freedom that goes all the way back to the beginning or the source of time. And it's a really complex development where he goes that will require you to read very slowly and iron things out and consider alternatives to your current worldview. Most of us haven't much opportunity to step outside of our own cultural context, and we may have been born with a certain set of ideas, like atheistic physicalism, or Catholicism, or Islam, or whatever it is. And a lot of us maybe don't even have a chosen worldview, and we're kind of just like floating along, and so many notions about reality may be just drifting in and out of our heads, and we're just kind of like in the moment trying to make the best choice. With the pandemic, of course, we're suddenly really faced on a daily basis with our mortality, and so hopefully that inspiration of the constant reminder of death and the deeper questions surrounding the causation of, say, sickness and whatnot will inspire your willingness to look more deeply. So I highly recommend this book, particularly the last two essays, the one on human immortality and determinism and human freedom. I think they will really help you to understand reality in a way that will really liberate you and give you a breath of fresh air in your daily life in the waking world, and help make sense of so many things that don't make sense if you are just looking at them in terms of, is life being like, say, a biochemical process. There's so many things that do not find a peaceful resting place within that paradigm. If you believe that human life is just a lucky, fortuitous, collection of random particles that somehow spontaneously creates human consciousness, and then suddenly that chemical process fails and we cease to exist. I think most people's intuitive sense rebels against that philosophy. We have a certain sense within us that time and space have a greater meaning than simply what we get from a clock or a telescope. So I encourage you to become a philosopher, particularly a metaphysical philosopher. And I think, even though the content of this book is extremely challenging, with some patience, it's not impenetrable. And it's, in my opinion, so universal. The choice of words that he presents us with is very universal. Like a guy like Swedenborg, or like Indian philosophy or Buddhist philosophy, is so dependent. The vocabularies are dependent on a traditional way of understanding these things. So Swedenborg, is very much a philosopher who takes his vocabularies from the Bible. The beautiful thing about Swedenborg is that he universalizes them and sees within the sort of narrow traditional Christian vocabulary, and he opens it up to the universal. Well, with Howison, he really just starts out with the universal and sticks with it. So he doesn't spend much time talking about Jesus, even though he professed to be a Christian. The people in his day couldn't understand his understanding of Christianity because it was so universal, and he spent so much time speaking in terms that didn't include, say, Bible references or, quoting scripture. So anyway, get this book and read it. Particularly the last two essays are really, really good. I really have gained a proper feeling for my own immortality, and in realizing my true freedom, which includes the past. amazingly. I feel very liberated from the past as a controlling element in my worldview. I can see that, who I was born to and the choices, good and bad, that I made, they don't determine my reality going forward, and they don't even determine the real nature of history. And history is actually a dynamic reality. And, that right there is, sort of an abstract, esoteric type statement. But Howison has a brilliant way of making that a statement that is entirely rational. So I'm not going to try to read the entire book to you, but if you want to understand human reality in a much deeper way, it'll take some work, but it's worth the effort. So get this book, The Limits of Evolution, by George Holmes Howison. It's a great book. So I wish you well, and I'll see you next time.